Hi, I'm Steven Swamp Dog, and today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite fictional subjects, superheroes. I have grown up loving DC, Marvel, as well as others, since I was a kid. One day, I was bored and felt like going on a drawing spree, and I decided to make these cinematic DC movie poster ideas. Along the way, I started imagining plot ideas, and soon I was thinking of, okay, who would I cast in the story? Until I accidentally created a hypothetical DC cinematic universe. So I decided to share my art today, as well as these story ideas with y'all. Now, some are not as heavily detailed as others, so some are rough around the edges. But I hope you enjoy, and if you like, leave a comment below on ideas you've had on how you would do a DC cinematic universe if you were in charge. I love reading people's ideas and sharing a mutual love for writing and superheroes. Okay, on to the video. First up is the one that started it all. Hell yeah! A Kiteman story. So when writing these concepts, I wanted to avoid basing them too heavily on the comics like the Batman did with the Long Halloween and Zero Year. And make it more loosely inspired in the same way the Dark Knight is loosely inspired by the Long Halloween and the Killing Joke. But it's more still largely a made-up narrative of its own. Don't get me wrong, the Batman was good, but I wasn't a fan at the way it handled its own plot while trying to squeeze in too much of the comics it was basing itself off of. In the case of Kiteman, I'm taking loose inspiration from The War of Jokes and Riddles and Batman Dark Victory. In this story, Kiteman, aka Charles Brown, who I would have played by either Bill Hader or Paul Rudd, is just getting out of rehab and is trying to make a fresh start and has been seeing a psychiatrist named Leslie Tompkins, who would be played by Lynn Shay or Sigourney Weaver, to help him move on from his son's death. He has trouble finding work and is flipping through the job ads section of a newspaper when we, the audience, would see a headline reading, "Two-Face killed in Arkham by Clown Prince of Crime." And another article to take note of is, Carmine Falcone to win trial again? Charles Brown is unsuccessful getting a job, but luck presents itself in the form of a woman named Gilda Dent, who I think should be played by Winona Ryder. Now, background information for those of you who don't know, Gilda Dent was the wife of Harvey Dent in some of the past Batman comics and was a main character in the storyline The Long Halloween. Now, the story is different in the comic, but my personal favorite is the two-part animated adaptation of the story. It is revealed at the end that she was the serial killer that's been killing off members of the Falcone family, going under the moniker Holiday. She did it to avenge a child they forced her to get rid of, as it was also the child of Carmine's son, who became one of Holiday's victims. She would basically explain who she is, hesitantly, to Charles Brown, and asks him to search for her missing daughter, Duella Dent. She explains that things have been tense between them, as Duella resented her for always holding out hope that Harvey could come back from being Two-Face. Charles asks why she would ask him to investigate, and it is because he is the least likely person to end up killing Duella and trying to bring her in, given that he is as insane as most of the unique characters in Gotham City. Charles reluctantly agrees to take her case for two reasons. One, he's not having luck in the job department. And two, he lost his own kid during the War of Jokes and Riddles and doesn't want to see someone else lose their child like he did. His first hint to finding Duella is that Falcone may know where she is, given that he has sent various goons after Gilda as soon as he found out she was back in town. After helping Gilda escape the hitmen in an action scene, Kiteman would begin to investigate by trying to get into Falcone's files, but is unsuccessful as security is too tight for him to sneak past. So he decides to seek the help of a thief, the kleptomaniac Madeline Pye, aka Magpie, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who he met while in Arkham and during some of Doc Tompkins' therapy sessions. He finds her living in a dump in the Narrows and promises to pay her for her assistance, and also tries to convince her to get help, given that he thought that she was making progress in some of the therapy sessions. Magpie wasn't able to get any jobs because her mental tics have always made it impossible for people to trust her, as she can't help but steal instinctively. She accepts the job since Charles was the only individual that has treated her decently close to a human being, besides Leslie Tompkins and the man who caught her, Batman. While the two wait for the cover of night, we would see a shipment to the docks get robbed by a gang of strange criminals, strange even for Gotham. A man with a batarang lodged into his skull, wielding 2 pistols, and another man with a footprint permanently implanted on his face, carrying a flamethrower. They both open fire, killing the smugglers on the docks. They are Bathead and Bootface, who would be played by Freddie Highmore and Mark Ruffalo. Then, a man with blonde hair and sunglasses steps out of the shadows, wearing a red open coat full of buttons, showing his bare chest, looking kind of like a hippie from the 60s. He crouches over any mobsters still left alive and toys with them by testing random drugs on them. This villain is Dr. Freak, aka Artemis Freaker, who should be played by the #1 perfect actor to play a long-haired psychedelic drug lord who's out of his mind, Jared Leto. He notices one mobster is running away, but he doesn't get far as a young teenage girl attacks the retreating criminal with a baseball bat. She wears a white skin mask with a weird familiar grin. She is the Joker's daughter, who I would have portrayed by either Lucy Hale, Rooney Mara, or Jenna Ortega. Basically, an actress who could pull off crazy. They take the shipment containing various weapons and exit the docks. Now we cut to a man in a fancy office who's receiving a phone call. Crime lord Carmine Falcone, played by either George Clooney, Ben Affleck, or Michael Keaton. I just love the idea of a former Batman actor who's now a lot older getting to play the famous crime boss. I'm mostly leaning towards George Clooney since he really looks the part now, with the white hair and mustache. Now, Carmine is alerted that someone tried to steal his files, and he worries that this could be connected to the missing incriminating evidence that had disappeared before his trial. He calls in the man he hired to cover up that evidence in the first place, professional saboteur Lenny Fiasco, aka the Eraser, a professional cleanup criminal who has made a career of covering up crimes for other villains, for the right price, of course. He would be portrayed by an actor who could pull off a smooth professional criminal type with, kind of a hitman aesthetic, but a sense of humor as well. Tom Hiddleston or Michael Weatherly. Falcone wants him to erase what is left of the files so no risk of him getting caught can occur. Eraser nods and writes a reminder on his hand before heading out, a little quirk of his. At night, Kiteman and Magpie successfully sneak into the office building, only to be confronted by the Eraser. The three briefly fight over the file folder until GCPD busts down the doors with a search warrant. Harvey Bullock is leading the raid, played by David Harbour, and pursues the 3 villains. The trio agree to a truce since none of them are eager to be sent back to Arkham Asylum anytime soon. Upon escaping the police, Magpie was able to sneakily take the file from Eraser before he could ditch them. The two read it and find out that Falcone has been trying to make a deal with a villain inside Arkham Asylum, who may or may not know the location of Gilda and Duella Dent. Meanwhile, the police are in pursuit of the Eraser, who has by now realized he's been had. He's about to be caught when a nearby building explodes. The police are distracted and the Eraser makes a run for it, only to have a gun pointed at him by a mime? Carmine Falcone is angered that one of his clubs has been hit, and evidence points to one of his rivals. He decides to give this other crime boss a call. We cut to a building with a grinning, cartoonish cat logo on it, and inside is a man wearing a furred coat over a suit and tie. His phone starts ringing and he answers it. Max Schreck speaking. I wanted to add him to this story because he was one of my favorite villains in Batman Returns, and I was actually sad we never get him in the comics or any other Batman media. So Max Schreck, obviously still played by Christopher Walken, answers the phone and gets threatened by Carmine, who says there's evidence pointing towards Schreck for the attack, and not so subtly accuses him of trying to make a move on his territory. Max Shrek scoffs at the statements and says he'll take care of whoever commanded the attack and face punishment for insubordination. At that moment, Chip, Shrek's son, walks in along with a teenage girl with short black hair and a goth dress style, played by Bex Taylor Kloss. Chip tells his father that Marcos Maez Shrek has gotten caught vandalizing school property again and has been suspended for the next few days. Shrek scolds her for getting caught and tells her that stupidity like that is why her mother died. Marcos doesn't say anything and glares at him before making certain hand gestures and exiting the room. We see her leave her father's building and take a motorbike to the Narrows and arrive at a seedy club called The Shell. She walks past various lowlifes, clubgoers, and dancers. She stops to have a conversation with one dancer in particular, Jaina Hudson, played by Halle Berry or Rosario Dawson, who is a friend of hers, and as they make small talk, we see weird twitches in Jaina's personality, and one of her eyes keeps changing from its normal magenta color to blood red. She's mostly annoyed that her boss isn't paying her as much as she was promised. Right then, said boss shows himself as small-time crime boss Humphrey Dumpler, aka Humpty Dumpty, played by Jonah Hill. Mime pays him for the job he did, blowing up some of Falcone's buildings using her father's resources and certain men that could be bribed. Another group enters the room, and Humpty Dumpty thanks the Mime, as they like to call her, for her business, but he has other customers to attend to. The other group is Dr. Freak and the Joker's daughter, who gives Humpty Dumpty the weapons they stole from the docks in exchange for access to Ace Chemicals, where he has the employees in his pocket. As Mime goes to another room, Jaina asks her who her cute friend is, and Mime responds that he's just the person she needs for her next plan. As she slides the door open, we see through the doorway that she has the eraser tied to a chair. Then, the door closes. Now we are back with Kiteman and Magpie as they walk into Arkham Asylum. They were allowed to visit one of the prisoners thanks to access given by Leslie Tompkins. Before they enter completely, Kiteman warns Magpie that they need to be careful, as the guy they're going to see is one of the scariest people he's ever met during his time there. Magpie asks what's so scary about him if he's not even a big villain name she recognizes. Charles responds that he was involved with the Halloween case. Madeline pauses in surprise, asking if he's referring to the incident that plunged Gotham into chaos, where Falcones were dying and villains were running rampant under Two-Face's command. He nods, making the thief shudder. They walk past several cells. Charles briefly pauses at Riddler's cell, staring at it with a haunted look, before he shakes it off and continues forward. The two arrive at a cell covered in pages of dates, and they see a bald, gaunt man sitting in the middle. Julian Day, a.k.a. Calendar Man, played by Rami Malek. He greets them, and the two ask him what he knows about Duella Dent. Julian analyzes the two and asks how their therapy is going, and plays mind games with them, basically saying that if they think this case can erase some of the guilt in their souls, they'll be sorely disappointed. And pointedly to Charles, he tells him that he is just as insane as the rest of the inmates at Arkham, and that like them, he will be just as much a killer as Two-Face was. Kite Man is about to lose it, but then he sees something in Julian's cell, and tells him to take care of himself before he leaves. Magpie questions him about why they're leaving, when they got nothing out of him. Kiteman tells her what he saw in the cell, a calendar page with an appointment scheduled between Julian and Falcone at the Shell Club at 4 p.m. about D.D. Duella Dent. The mime is trying to communicate with the eraser, but he doesn't understand sign language, so she has Jaina translate for her. Mime wants the eraser to sell out Falcone to the authorities while also making it seem like he's going against her father, Max Shrek. Eraser is confused by this request, but he's far more afraid of Falcone than he is of Mime, so he refuses her request, while also critiquing her amateur techniques in interrogation. Mime gets angry, and Jaina quickly stops her from hitting Eraser with a crowbar, and recommends that Marcos takes a breather. Then, Jaina goes to start her next shift, But while she gets ready in her dressing room, we see a photo of her and another girl who has a wide grin on her face, while Jaina smiles sheepishly in the photo. After Jaina looks away from the photo, we see her reflection grinning at her with the exact same smile as the girl in the photo. She shrugs it off and exits the dressing room. Mime is about to continue her aggressive negotiations, but turns around to see the eraser is broken free of his bonds. He grabs her and puts a pencil against her skull. The eraser threatens her, saying he's seen other villains do far worse with just a pencil, and won't hesitate to stab her through the head with it. Just as he starts edging towards the door, Humpty Dumpty enters, flanked by several men. Mime smirks, thinking that the odds are in her favor, but after Eraser is restrained, she finds herself being grabbed as well. Humpty Dumpty offers his apologies to her, saying that Max Schreck and Falcone has traced her activities to Humpty's club, and he can't afford to be implicated in her endeavors. So the two villains are restrained and caged above the dance floor of the shell. Meanwhile, just outside the club, Kiteman and Magpie arrive at the shell. They are at the entrance trying to get the bouncer to let them in, to no avail, when a short, shabby-looking bald man walks up behind them.
"Excuse me, mate. Mind stepping aside?"
The two investigators step away, and the bouncer starts to tell the bald man to get lost after throwing a punch, when he suddenly goes silent. The bald man grins and politely says,
"Would you be a mate and open the door for a fella?"
The bouncer does so, and the bald man enters.
"Thanks, mate. Now go grab yourself a coffee or whatever it is you drink, and don't get hit by traffic."
He pats the bouncer on the shoulder, and the bouncer walks away with a few dollars the bald man handed him, and immediately gets hit by a car. Kiteman and Magpie look at each other in shock, but enter the club as quick as they can, following behind the bald man. They start sneaking around searching for any sign of the missing dent. The bald man walks into the middle of the dance floor, and after looking around, he sees two things. One, a cage above the dance floor with Mime and Eraser, and two, the effects area that the DJ sits in. He looks the DJ in the eye and requests that he exits the room. He starts fiddling with electronics and the lights flash in strange patterns as he picks up a mic and tells the club goers to exit the premises right this minute. All the club goers exit as if in some sort of trance. Humpty Dumpty and his gang confront the bald man, and the crime boss asks who he is.
"The name's Spellbinder, mate,"
played by Andy Serkis.
"and I'm here to pick up Mr. Shrek's problem."
He snaps his fingers, and several security guards enter the room with their own guns, and now there's a Mexican standoff between Humpty Dumpty and Spellbinder. Kiteman, wanting to avoid bloodshed, sneaks up behind Spellbinder and knocks him out. Humpty Dumpty thanks him, but he immediately has Kiteman and Magpie restrained. Turns out Falcone is well aware of the two thieves who broke into his files and who they're searching for. So, Kiteman, Magpie, Eraser, Mime, and Spellbinder are all now in the same cage. The group all starts bickering and playing the blame game. Spellbinder is surprised to find that the person he was hired to kill is just a kid, which makes Eraser scoff. Spellbinder gives him a look saying,
"Oi, some of us have standards. Mine's not killing kids."
Mime is highly distrustful of the others, but Spellbinder, who knows sign language, banters with her, and the two start to get along after some snarky dialogue. Eraser recommends that he and Kiteman work together, though the gliding villain is quite skeptical. Eraser cuts to the chase and tells him that Falcone will have his head for failing at his mission so many times today. He hasn't been this embarrassed since his defeat by Batman. Humpty Dumpty hears a knock on the doors of the shell and allows Falcone to enter, and he has his employees provide entertainment. Jaina Hudson notices the cages with Marcos inside it, and she starts to have a splitting headache. She looks in the mirror and starts arguing with her reflection, who's excited and ready for a fight. Jaina is quite nervous, but her other personality she calls Rabbit points out that her abilities can get her friend out of that cage. And also, it'd be good to get payback on Humpty Dumpty for still not paying her as much as she was previously promised. Jaina finally consents, and she's possessed by her alter ego, the White Rabbit. In the cage, Kiteman is trying, and failing, to get everyone to work together in a plan to escape, when suddenly everyone hears maniacal laughter coming from the dressing rooms. Suddenly, an albino blur jumps out and grabs onto the cage. Blood-red eyes glow, and the white rabbit smiles, with teeth showing at the captive villains. "Hey, Mime," she says, and after ripping the cage door off, she says, "If y'all want to survive, I recommend following the white rabbit." The villains look at each other, and they all immediately start running for their lives as Falcone and Humpty Dumpty's men open fire. The group eventually end up on the roof and are barely holding off the gangsters. Kiteman has a plan and asks everyone their weight, much to the confusion of the others. He asks them to give him time, and with that, Charles quickly begins assembling random objects with some of the gear in his jacket. Eraser looks at what Kiteman has assembled and says, "You've got to be kidding me." A group of different kite-shaped hang gliders are assembled in different sizes. Eraser refuses to trust Kiteman, and since he doesn't trust him not to sabotage the one for him, Kiteman tells him to trust him.
"I don't care as long as we get off this bloody rooftop,"
says Spellbinder, and he immediately grabs a random glider, but Kiteman shouts, "Wait!" as Spellbinder has trouble controlling his glider. Charles quickly grabs another glider and jumps after him, and grabs Spellbinder, telling them that he had made each of the gliders customized to each specific person's weight. Spellbinder goes, "Oh," as they continue, followed by Magpie, Mime, White Rabbit, and lastly the Eraser, after he has hesitated. Eraser is shaky, clearly uncomfortable, much to Magpie's amusement as he says, "Okay, now how do we get down?" Falcone is angry, while Humpty Dumpty assures him that this will be taken care of. He's already tracked down the target, and it will be resolved before the night is through. The group of rogues land on a rooftop and take a moment to catch their breath. The others are about to split, but Kiteman asks each of them for assistance in the search for Duella Dent. Mime agrees to help since it disrupts Falcone's plans, which means likewise it disrupts her father's plans. Spellbinder's convinced since Mime offers to pay for his help. Eraser will help as well since Mime can arrange a passport for him to flee somewhere where Falcone won't find him, using her money and connections that aren't under Falcone. Jaina, now back to normal, agrees to help because Mime is helping, and she has her own personal reasons as well. Kiteman and Magpie are pleased, but the team still has a long way to go before they trust each other. Jaina says she knows where to find Duella since she's overheard all of her dealings with Humpty Dumpty. They start to make their way to Ace Chemicals after procuring a truck. While they drive there, some of the team makes small talk. Jaina is struggling with her White Rabbit alter ego and switches in and out while talking to Kiteman and Magpie in the front seat. When she asks Kiteman why he's so invested in the case, he talks about his involvement with the infamous War of Jokes and Riddles, which was several years ago by now, back when Batman had just started appearing, but after he and his rogues gallery were established. He explains how he was one of Joker's henchmen, who was a mechanic on his flying vehicles in particular. He did the work since it was a way for him to pay child support. He and his son used to fly kites together a lot, and one day he asks his son if he's having fun. The boy responds, "Hell yeah!" to which Charles scolds him for using a bad word, telling him that only bad people use that kind of language, and that they go to hell. His son asks him why that is. Charles doesn't really have an answer, and just tells him that's just how he was raised to know. As the war got worse, Charles was busted by Batman, and was made to be his informant to spy on Joker. But things got worse when Riddler got to Charles as well, and forced him to send Joker into a trap. Joker survived and strapped Charles to a bomb. Batman saved him and decided to have him spy on Riddler instead. Later on, Charles finds out that his son had been poisoned, skin contact, and the poison was on a kite string. As his son lay dying, he weakly asks, "I said that bad word again. Am I going to hell?" Charles tells his son no and cradles the boy in his arms. Later, Charles is angry and soon starts making weapons around the kite theme, in memory of his son. And when he confronts the Joker, the clown upon seeing him asks, "Are you serious?" Kiteman responds, "Hell yeah." Kiteman tries to kill the clown, but he's beaten easily and horribly. The clown doesn't even bother to kill him, instead leaving him near the GCPD as Batman's table scraps. Batman finds him and tries to get him to get help, but seeing that he can't convince Kiteman to stop his path of vengeance, he at least allows him to continue spying on Riddler. Eventually, Batman and a few of the less insane rogues who were sick of the war finally confront Joker and Riddler, and the two are taken down, but not before Riddler reveals that he was the one to poison the kite string in an attempt to get Batman to go after the Joker even more, given that he cares about the innocent so much. It destroys Charles emotionally that his son was merely dehumanized bait to the green villain, and after attempting to kill the Riddler, and failing, Kiteman turns himself in as well, and allows Batman to take him to jail without a fight. Now, I do know this is a long explanation, but I would try to find a way to shorten the flashback story in the film. Jaina actually relates to Kiteman, telling him that she's lost people too. Her sister and her were up-and-coming dancers at a school for performing arts and choreography. Jaina was shy, studious, and reserved, while her younger sister Harriet was a boisterous party girl who was friends with everyone. One day, her sister and her were attacked on the way home from school, and her sister was murdered right in front of her eyes. The police never caught the killer, and it left Jaina mourning and paranoid, to the point where she couldn't even get up on stage anymore. Unable to accept her sister is gone, her grief manifested itself as a split personality, calling itself the White Rabbit, which Rabbit was her sister's nickname, given how much she skipped and hopped all the time on and off the stage. She has enhanced leg and arm strength, which makes her able to jump higher and bend certain materials like the cage she rescued Kiteman's group from. She doesn't know where these powers came from, only that they manifested after her sister's death. Her personality takes over for her whenever she has to perform on stage, and is like an autopilot she uses to deal with particularly negative situations. After that, Jaina decides to take a nap, given that she hasn't almost slept for 3 whole days, leaving Magpie and Kiteman to talk. Meanwhile, in the back, Spellbinder and Eraser are curious what Mime's whole vendetta with crime bosses is about. When asked by Eraser, she flips him off, but when Spellbinder actually uses tact and asks her, she explains with Spellbinder translating. Marcos couldn't speak since birth and was used to not being listened to by her father, Max Schreck. He mostly just paid attention to her older brother, Chip, trying to mold him into an exact copy of him, basically. Things were not stable in the Schreck family. After her mother caught Max with a prostitute, she threatens to divorce him and take half of everything. Max, driven to a rage, pushed Marcos' mother out of a window, and Marcos, who was waiting outside her mother's car, was unable to call for help for her dying mother. She is sick of being unheard and ignored, and swore vengeance upon all of Gotham's crime families for all the cover-ups and horrendous acts they've gotten away with. Spellbinder feels bad for the kid and offers some form of comfort, showing a rare gentle side. I kind of picture Mime and Spellbinder's friendship would be sort of similar to Wolverine's friendships with X-23, Rogue, or Kitty Pryde. After that, Mime decides to take a poke at Eraser and make him tell his origin. He responds, clearly pissed off with, "I'm not a good person. I don't have a boo-hoo sad origin like the rest of you. I'm a man of material worth, and own it. I was in a high-class college and was determined to be the best of the best. No one would compare to the academic records I'd set. And then I learned the hardest lesson to swallow. There's always someone better than you. Pretty boy of Gotham royalty himself, Bruce Wayne, attended the same college I did. He had it all. The good looks, the cash, and unfortunately, as I learned, the smarts. Everything I did, he could do better. And once graduation hit, I realized I was just as unremarkable as everyone else. There was nothing special about me at all. My only skill was my ability to cover my tracks. In a last-ditch attempt to prevent Wayne from outshining me, I attempted to sabotage his essays, projects, etc. Somehow, though, I was unsuccessful. But I was never caught either. Turns out I had the smarts to cover up crimes quite well, which earned me a lot of money in college. Dorm life in Gotham is nearly as bad as the streets. Well, I soon took my wealth and invested into becoming an excellent marksman and criminology expert. and I learned something important. No matter what you do, you can only get ahead by doing whatever it takes to win and erase every loss. Unlike you lot, I don't get all weepy and feel sorry for myself. I just look out for number one, me. Does that answer your question? And he turns away with a sniff. Mime looks angry, but signs to Spellbinder that she kind of pities someone that pathetic. Meanwhile, back up front, Kiteman is driving while Magpie is stuck as White Rabbit's pillow. She tells him for what it's worth, she thinks he's a good person. He's disbelieving of this statement, but she points out several things to him. No normal stranger would go as far and out of their way as he has to find that woman's missing daughter, and that if anything, he's more of a hero than a crook. Kiteman asks her if she'd ever like to be a hero. Magpie says that she could never be. Trust is not something that anyone will be ever able to give her. She doesn't even trust herself. Kiteman says he trusts her, which genuinely makes her smile a little, and jokingly tells him that's because he is one of the good guys. Naivete is part of the occupation. Meanwhile, at Ace Chemicals, Dr. Freak is putting the finishing touches on his new formula. It's a new version of Joker toxin that induces even more intense pain and hallucinations. He plans to hold the city for ransom with the chemical weapons he'll make out of this. Meanwhile, we cut to his would-be apprentice, walking along the catwalk above the chemicals, looking down at the vats of green acid. She sees her reflection from all the way up there, and we get brief flashes of Duella's past in the acidic reflections below. I'm not exactly sure what we would see, but they would convey the fear she had of her father, Two-Face, for the rare times she did see him on TV, or once when he spoke to Gilda in person. She hated the fear and hurt that she and her mother lived in because of the coin-flipping villain. Then we see past Duella watching TV, and the report on TV that Harvey was murdered in prison by the Joker. Duella grins while Gilda actually cries. She and her mother get into an argument as she can't comprehend why her mother would still feel anything for the villain who made their lives a living hell. She's out on the street where she hangs out with basically Joker fans, and after meeting Dr. Freak through some of the Joker fans, she is given the face mask and she reinvents herself under the moniker the Joker's daughter, completely disowning and disassociating herself from her birth father and modeling herself after the man who killed him. She's taken out of her thoughts when she sees a gray truck pull up outside. She eyes it suspiciously. The Kiteman gang finally arrive at Ace Chemicals, and as they get out of the truck, Eraser snaps at Spellbinder that he never told his origin. Spellbinder replies that,
"Yes, I did. You just don't remember it."
His eyes glow with swirls mischievously, while Mime covers her laugh, clearly in on the joke. We leave it ambiguous whether he's just messing with Eraser, or if he truly did hypnotize him into forgetting anything he may have told him. The group exit the truck and begins sneaking into the chemical plant. Spellbinder quickly starts hypnotizing as many people as possible to gain access. Eraser covers up the evidence that the 6 rogues have taken the place of 6 employees and helps hide the knocked out workers. Magpie starts stealing the master keys from one of the managers. White Rabbit points upward to the catwalk and tells Charles that's Duella. He is surprised and disturbed by Duella's appearance, but begins making his way up anyway. He is walking quietly towards the Joker's daughter when she suddenly turns around trying to swing her baseball bat at him. Charles tries to explain who he is and why he's here, but Duella doesn't care. Suddenly, Dr. Freak appears with Bootface and Bathead. Bootface attacks Magpie and Eraser with his flamethrower, while Bathead attacks Mime, Spellbinder, and White Rabbit. Spellbinder attempts to hypnotize Bathead, but it doesn't work. He reveals that his victims need to have 2 eyes in order to be entranced. Kiteman tries to convince Duella to come back with him, but Dr. Freak tells her that they're so close to finishing the project and all the trucks are nearly ready. Kiteman asks Dr. Freak who he is. Dr. Freak reveals himself to be an obsessor of the Joker, and he believes that with the proper Joker toxin, this time they can achieve infamy in the minds of Gotham. No longer just some normal stoner who has no future. He will ascend to the top of the Rogues Gallery, alongside the Clown Prince of Crime.
"Oh, okay. So you're crazy."
exclaims Kiteman. Dr. Freak is angered and orders the Joker's daughter to kill Kiteman. He tries to convince her to stand down, that he knows guys like Dr. Freak, and they don't care about people and if they hurt them. Unfortunately, Charles just made Duella angrier, and she swings her bat harder as she unleashes her rage at Kiteman, who is barely holding up given that Duella is a very fast fighter. She suddenly pauses a moment when he tells her that her mother is back in town looking for her too. She glared at him and says to him, "Tell me, if my mother cares so much, would a real mother allow this?" She takes her mask off, revealing acid burns across the upper part of her face, eyes wide with anger and pain. To happen to her own daughter? She charges at Kiteman, swinging more fiercely than before. My mother wouldn't give up on that monster. She wouldn't accept that the good in people is just a fragile construct, and we are all sick on the inside. My darling father found us again, and when I told him to leave and never come back, you know what he did? He gave me a choice. Heads, I become like him. Tails, he'd leave and never bother me again. She loses the coin toss, and Two-Face, played by Stuart Stafford, takes out a small vial of acid and grabs Duella, attempting to pour the vial on her face. Gilda grabs at Two-Face, trying to save her daughter, and the vial goes flying, and the burning acid rains on the teen, and she screams in pain. My mother was the reason I ended up like this. She could have called GCPD. She could have called Batman for all I know, but she did nothing. Her baseball bat flies through the air more manically than before, as her voice gets more and more choked with raw pain. It took a supervillain to finally get me some justice in the world. A villain who truly understands what the world really is. Duella eventually gets a hit on Kiteman, and he topples over in pain. And the scene becomes a homage to Death in the Family, with the way Duella swings her bat the same way Joker was swinging the crowbar he used to kill Jason Todd. But before she can get the final swing, she hears Magpie yell, "No!" before charging. Duella readies herself for a fight until a gun click is heard, and Dr. Freak has his gun against the temple of the barely conscious Kiteman. You'll be dropping your weapons now, or your jolly green pilot guy is gonna spring a leak in the old noggin. Are we understood? Anger is in Magpie's eyes, but she does as told anyway. The others see that their unofficial team leader is down, and slowly, one by one, they drop their weapons, except Eraser. Magpie looks at Eraser pleadingly as the selfish criminal keeps his gun trained on Dr. Freak's two henchmen. Please. Finally, Eraser concedes and his pistols clatter to the ground. Well done. Now, let's get you all settled in for the ride. The others are rounded up and locked inside a cage or prison of some sort, but Kiteman is taken by Dr. Freak, who mocks him and tells him that he'll get to witness the next big villain's rise to power in person. Kiteman is loaded inside the lead chemical truck with Dr. Freak, his henchmen, and Duella. The barely conscious Charles Brown looks at Duella, eyes full of sympathy that make the teenage villain uncomfortable, and she glares daggers at him while holding her bat threateningly. He tries to convince her that her mother truly cares, but the girl is angry and lost. But conflict shows in her black eyes, shining within the skin mask. The truck suddenly stops, and Kiteman is ushered out by Dr. Freak's henchmen. He looks, his eyes adjusting to the shadow of the dead forest they're in. It looks strangely familiar. Dr. Freak turns around, smirking, and says, "Go ahead, ask where we are." He asks where they are, and Dr. Freak pulls out a remote, and the chemical trucks open to reveal a strange gun turret, and some of the henchmen are pouring chemicals into the slots on the side of the turret. Aim, ready, fire one! A henchman confirms, "Fire one!" And the turret shoots a long, smooth cannon shell that bursts into gas into the air. Kiteman suddenly realizes where the airborne gas has landed. Arkham Asylum. Kiteman looks at Dr. Freak with wide eyes. You can't be serious. If half the prisoners in there are set loose, innocents will die. Dr. Freak smiles sadistically. Oh, I don't know. You seem to be advocating for redemption, along with that group of villains you were dragging along. Perhaps you were right, and these gents will show a merciful death to half the guards. Though I think not. Fire 2! His henchman confirms with him Fire 2, and a shell is shot from the second cannon, and as it flies into the clouded chemical air zone, it blows up midair and sets half the fortifications of Arkham on brightly lit multicolored fire. We see the guards getting overwhelmed by various villains, which this would be a fun opportunity to have a ton of cameos from actors like Danny DeVito, David Dotchmalin, Jim Carrey, Troy Baker, Robin Lord Taylor, Ben McKenzie, Michelle Pfeiffer, and many others playing random villains attacking the guards, as a homage to many of the villains they've played in DC projects. Harvey Bullock is trying to get control of this situation, but it's getting more and more dire by the minute. With Dr. Freak, a purple helicopter lands with green highlights and a painted clown face. Recognize it? It's one of your finest works while under Joker's employ. Kiteman's eyes widen in shock as he is loaded onto the Joker copter and it flies towards the roof of the asylum. Meanwhile, back at Ace Chemicals, Bathead and Bootface are preparing the cage with the rest of the group to be dumped into the acid vats below. The group are freaked out, but they are able to get free when Magpie is able to swipe an object from Bootface after Spellbinder mocks him. They apparently know each other. It's more a vague reference, if anything, kind of the vague way John Wick characters talk to each other. But it would very much imply that Bootface and Spellbinder have some sort of beef. Magpie jams the machine meant to dump them to their death, and they get free. Bootface and Bathead retreat after being outnumbered. Magpie wants to go rescue Kiteman, but the others aren't sure if they should, especially when Eraser says, "Didn't you see half the chemicals they were loading? Over half of those are meant for warfare, and I, for one, don't want to end up in a ditch near wherever they've gone." Magpie points out Kiteman believes in the best of each of them, even when he has seen some of their worst tendencies. She tells him that maybe some of them are far too gone to change. But Kiteman is one of the only people she's met who's truly good on the inside. The group look at one another, wondering if perhaps redemption is not as far off as they think. Eraser looks at them in disgust and gets up to leave. Magpie asks him where he's going. He tells the group that he has been transparent from the start. He's out for number 1. The mime looks at him in contempt and throws him a card. She signs that it's her father's passport forger's number and that it'll get him where he wants to go. Mime signs that she'll help Magpie save Charles. Spellbinder shrugs and says that he's honestly tired of the villain gig anyway and will assist them. White Rabbit and Jaina both agree to help for once, in full unison. Magpie is glad, but Jaina asks how they're supposed to even find out where the psychotic hippie took Charles. Mime gives a sinister grin. We cut to Shrek's office. He's on his phone until he's tackled by Spellbinder and tied to a chair. He glares at his daughter as she signs that she wants to know where Falcone is going. He's not at his office. Shrek raises an eyebrow asking how she knows that. We cut to Falcone's office space. It's wrecked and unconscious gangsters litter the floor. White Rabbit and Magpie stand there looking at the mess they made, confirming that Falcone isn't home. Shrek and Mime trade words, and he keeps trying to bait a reaction out of her. When I killed your mother, I at least bothered with a nice grave. But you'll be lucky if you get anything as pleasant as a landfill. Mime doesn't lose control, though. But Spellbinder has finally had enough, and takes the answer forcefully this time, with both his eyes swirling hypnotically, and Shrek yells in pain, clutching at his head. As they leave, Mime asks why he reacted so strongly to Shrek's words, since she's heard far worse from him. Spellbinder simply says, I know what it's like to hear those kind of words, and I said that they didn't hurt me just like you. Truth is, kid, those words don't hurt in the moment, but they always sink in under the skin later. Mime is taken aback by this as they exit the room. Dr. Freak stands on the roof of the asylum, having already exited the Joker copter. Kiteman looks at the chaos in front of him and then at Duella. She glares at Dr. Freak and says, "Okay, we did your plan. Now about my payment." The insane drug lord grins and says, "Oh, of course. You'll find it to the door down the hall across from the 5th guard tower." She sniffs and stalks off past Kiteman, but before she leaves, she turns to look at him, a small hint of concern showing. She turns to Dr. Freak asking, "So what are you going to do with him?" Dr. Freak raises an eyebrow and shrugs, saying, "You know." Duella nods, resigned. "Yeah, I do." "What are you doing?" "Well, you see, we had a deal, and she's picking up payment. Isn't that right, Duella, dear?" Kiteman thinks about it for a second, and all the color drains from his face. "Please tell me you aren't trying to see him." Duella doesn't answer, instead looking at Dr. Freak saying, "Thanks, Doc." She then turns away, walking towards the asylum steps. Dr. Freak looks triumphantly at Charles, eyes glistening with vindictive excitement. "Well, Charles, this is where we say goodbye. But first..." He starts dragging Charles towards the edge of the asylum's roof, towards two figures who are standing, watching the chaos in the prison yard below. Kiteman squints at the figures, and then recognition dawns on his face. "You!" Julian Day and Carmine Falcone stand there, and the gaunt, holiday-obsessed serial killer smiles at the anti-hero. "Hello, Charles. So you three were in cahoots all along?" "Yes. Artemis here is an old cellmate of mine. He was able to get my messages to Mr. Falcone once he was back in normal society, since he once sold drugs for him." "Why do this? Why use Duella in your scheme?" Calendar Man's eyes have a murderous glint in them, and he answers, "Because of her." Two goons drag Gilda Dent to the group, her face blackened and bruised. Falcone looks at her in vengeful anger. "What?" "You must understand, I am a criminal who tolerates many things, but if there is one thing I do not allow, it's plagiarism." He turns to Gilda and lifts her chin to look at him as he continues, "Holiday, the serial killer who took my artistry and was the talk of the town. A pitiful woman looking for vengeance on a crime boss's family, while I was in jail, long forgotten about by the rest of Gotham." Kiteman looks at Calendar Man in disbelief. "All of this because she copied your gimmick?" Julian nods as if this is a reasonable answer. "Yes." His eyes turn back to Kiteman, grinning sickly. "And now there's only one thing left to do. Once Duella returns from a meeting with the clown, she'll finally fulfill her role and truly kill the last piece of dent in Gotham. And then she too will lie down in death's embrace." Falcone now grins and says, "Finally, my family will be avenged." "Please don't do this," Kiteman pleads, shaking his head. Calendar Man grins and points his gun at Kiteman as he tries to weakly struggle against Dr. Freak, who's restrained him. Charles is dangerously close to the roof's edge. "You really do show promise, Charlie, but I'm afraid you have something that prevents you from ever joining our wonderful pantheon." Julian turns to Dr. Freak. "Thank you for your service, Artemis, but I'm afraid it's no longer required." He suddenly aims his gun at Dr. Freak and pulls the trigger, shooting the villain in the heart, and both Kiteman and Dr. Freak fall off of the roof. Kiteman falls in slow motion, in shock, wondering if this is how he dies. We hear nothing but the sound of wind and a heartbeat. We get a glimpse of Kiteman's son and a voice asking, "Am I going to hell? Am I going to hell? Am I going to hell?" Suddenly, a blur zooms across the sky and a figure exclaims, "Got you!" Charles opens his eyes in surprise and sees that Magpie has caught him using a feather-styled glider that resembles bird wings. Madeline? Well, it sure isn't heaven angels, dear. And they land on the ground at the asylum's gate. The rest of the gang run up to them, and Charles asks what they're doing here. Saving your rear end, says Jaina Hudson, smiling. Charles looks over at Mime, who's nodding, and Spellbinder, who says,
Yeah, so, what now?
Kiteman looks up at the asylum and says, The Joker's daughter, Duella. She's in over her head. This has all been a sick trap laid for her and her mom. We need to save them. Magpie taps his shoulder, pointing at the rampaging inmates. I want to save her too, but if those thieves, killers, and supervillains get out of Arkham, all of Gotham City is going to face a death toll not seen since the flood of 2001. Mime signs, we need to stop them. Jaina looks worried. But there's only a few of us and an army of them. Kiteman sees her point, but as he looks around, he notices a particular tower of Arkham, and he smiles, a plan forming in his mind. I have a plan. Come on! He runs, and the others follow him in confusion. We cut back to Harvey Bullock and the rest of the police trying to regain control of Arkham. They've set up a blockade, attempting to keep the prisoners from escaping, but they can't hold it much longer. Suddenly, an explosion is heard. Where the heck did that come from? That was the weapons lockup, Detective Bullock. Charles is running around inside and grabbing certain items, and Magpie gestures over to the corner of the room. He sees something, and his eyes glisten. Magpie squeezes his hand, smiling kindly, before walking away. We see him hold a green helmet with orange lenses. Back with the blockade, they can't hold on much longer, but suddenly a smoke bomb goes off and everyone stops fighting. What now? Suddenly, Kiteman and his gang walk out carrying several iconic weapons and heading towards the rioting prisoners. Charles is wearing his old costume he had during the War of Jokes and Riddles, walking with a determined look on his face. The criminals see them and a few start laughing while one asks, Is that Kiteman? Kiteman smiles and softly says, Hell yeah. And the gang charges at the convicts using weapons they stole from lockup, like Mr. Freeze's ice blaster, Joker's boxing glove gun, Harley Quinn's hammer, Riddler's cane, and Catwoman's whip. I picture that War of Change by Thousand Foot Crutch plays as the battle song for the action scene. The cops all look baffled as one asks, Am I seeing what I think I am? And Bullock says, You're asking me? We cut to the roof of the asylum. Calendar Man and Falcone jump out of the way as a stray ice blast nearly hits them. What was that? Suddenly, Bootface and Bathead show up on the roof and inform Calendar Man what's happened. He raises an eyebrow and looks at Falcone. Said crime boss summons his mobsters, and they go to deal with the would-be heroes, followed by Bootface and Bathead. Back at the battle, it is turning in favor of Kiteman's gang, just as the mobsters show up opening fire. The others tell Charles to go and save the kid, and that they'll deal with Falcone and his men. Meanwhile, Duella is arriving at the cell of the Joker, still locked up tight. The only one, in fact. We hear shuffling on the cell, and Duella's eyes widen as she hears tapping to the tune of jingle bells and muffled laughter coming from inside the cell. She's about to reach for the switch to open it when she suddenly hesitates. She turns around and sees a hallucination of Two-Face, human half hidden in the shadows. Still unable to choose. You just need a divining rod. The shadowed vision holds a coin, making Duella pale, but her hatred burns in her eyes. I don't need a coin. I'm not weak like you were. I'm not a dent. After today, I'm the Joker's daughter. Two-Face scowls. Then why don't you open that door? She looks determined, but she looks back at the roof. You're weak. You are actually wondering if letting that guy die is the right thing to do. Didn't you say right and wrong are not real choices? That we're all naturally sick in the soul? Go and prove it. Duella yells unintelligibly and tries to punch the hallucination, but she ends up punching a wall, bloodying her knuckles. She then ends up running towards the roof. Meanwhile, Kiteman fights his way up to the roof of Arkham Asylum, and his friends are keeping the other villains at bay. Spellbinder is seen battling Bootface and is about to be killed by Bathead, but Mime intervenes and battles him. White Rabbit gets nearly overwhelmed by Killer Croc and their tough villains, but then she turns back into Jaina, who's smaller in size, so she slips past Killer Croc and the bulky brawlers. Spellbinder and Mime take on Bootface and Bathead, using sign language to communicate their ideas, and they come up with a plan luring the two thugs into a trap. Bootface remains strong, and he has a battle of strength with Spellbinder. The Cockney bounty hunter is losing, given that his hypnosis isn't working on Bootface. That is, until Mime jumps onto Bootface's back and gouges her fingers into his wrinkly, scarred eyelids and opens them wide. This is all the opening Spellbinder needs, and he uses both eyes to make the brute of the boot yell in agony and fall down on the floor, convulsing until he suddenly goes still. Spellbinder checks Bootface's pulse. The villain is dead. He mutters,
"Sorry, mate. We always knew it'd end this way."
And he pats him on the cheek. He turns around and checks on Mime.
"Hey, kid, you alright?"
The teen nods and accepts a helping hand up as they charge back into battle. Magpie uses her sleight of hand and Riddler's cane to memorize a few criminals for a second before she takes them out. She smiles, but then we hear a voice in the shadows and a silhouette of a figure wearing a green bowler hat laugh sinisterly.
"Well, well, well. Riddle me this."
What? But before he could say anything more, Magpie figures out where the voice is coming from and throws Riddler's cane into the shadows like a javelin. And we hear a comedic scream of pain from Riddler as Magpie continues dispatching other convicts. Kiteman bursts through the door to the roof to see Duella standing in front of Calendar Man and Gilda Dent. "Mom?" Calendar Man sees the pain in Duella's eyes and smiles, telling her to finish it, tossing her his gun. He tells her to kill the one last piece of Duella Dent left inside. Kiteman tries to calmly intervene and tells her that it's not too late. She could still walk away from this, that her and her mother can still at least try to heal the rift between them. Duella snaps in a broken voice. "Why don't you walk away? Huh? Why don't you walk away? Why do you care about anything I do? You have no stake in this." "Because I don't want you to lose everyone you love like I did. And no matter how hard you deny it, a part of you still has a piece of Two-Face inside you. But you also have a piece of your mother inside you. And it is up to you which side you're going to listen to."
"Oh yes, the murderer. How can we forget? Right, Gilda?"
A look of fear enters Gilda's eyes. "Please don't."
"You really thought that the Joker killed Two-Face?"
He is the easiest scapegoat in all of Gotham, but I'm afraid that he didn't commit this particular murder. Gilda did. Duella is shocked and looks at her mother in disbelief. "You're screwing with me. Why would my mom kill my father? She couldn't even say a bad word about him." Kiteman looks at Gilda closely and contemplatively says, "Because she had something worth killing for." "What could she possibly? You! I did it for you. I held out hope for Harvey for years and years, but I am not just a wife. I am also a mother. And when he did what he did to you, I couldn't sleep knowing it was my fault, that I allowed this to happen. So I contacted Calendar Man since he could go unnoticed, and I gave him all the resources he needed to," she swallows, "to kill Two-Face." Calendar Man grins.
"She didn't give me her identity, of course, but it was rather easy deducing who was hiring me. And that gave me all the chance I needed to get us all in the same room together."
Gilda looks at her daughter with sorrow and regret in her eyes and tells her that she understands if Duella never forgives her. She doesn't even forgive herself, but no matter what, she loves her daughter. Duella holds the gun, and it slowly slips out of her hands, and she falls to her knees crying, tears leaking out of the mask, wetting it to the point it slips off her face. Gilda doesn't even hesitate and runs to her daughter, holding her tight. We see Calendar Man frown in disappointment, and he raises his own gun at the mother and daughter, preparing to end the Dent line himself. Until we hear a click. Julian turns and sees that Kiteman is taking Duella's fallen pistol and is aiming it at Julian, determination in his eyes. "Drop the gun, Julian." Calendar Man looks at him with mirth in his eyes.
"Oh, Charlie, I'm afraid I can't do that. I told you you'd be a killer like me one horrible day. That's the only way you're going to save these two, well, I can't say innocent, but pitiful individuals."
He smiles, an insane glint in his eyes, taking away his usually calm demeanor, nothing but madness on his face.
"Make your choice, Charlie. Hero or Two-Face?"
Kiteman is hesitant, but cocks the gun, ready to take the shot.
Yes! 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 I knew you had it! Bang!
Calendar Man falls to the floor, a direct shot in the heart. Charles jumps in shock and looks around quickly, and then he sees it. A figure sitting on top of one of Arkham's many towers, wearing a navy blue fedora with a pencil sticking out of the brim. Eraser says to himself, "I'm not a good person. But you don't need to go that way either." And he tilts his hat to Charles and makes his way over to him. Charles asks why Eraser would help. The marksman responds that he thought it was a stupid way to commit your first kill, and he tries to downplay the fact he helped out of good intent. He walks over to Gilda and Duella and hands them 2 folders. Gilda asks what this is. Eraser tells her that these are new identities and passports to a place they can start anew. He then tells them to now get lost, and the mother and daughter, looking unsure but willing, start leaving. Not everything is good between them, but they are willing to start the long road to healing. Kiteman turns to Eraser, smiling. "I knew there. If you say what I think you're saying, I will throw you off this roof myself." Kiteman raises his hands in mock surrender, but still smiles anyway. Suddenly, the others catch up to Kiteman and Eraser on the roof. They manage to keep all the inmates occupied until Commissioner Gordon arrived with reinforcements, and they regain control of the prison. They are all in a celebratory mood and are about to leave when suddenly they hear the sound of "Freeze!" And they see Harvey Bullock and his GCPD squad ready to arrest them. "Seriously, Detective?" "Oh yeah, none of you are leaving until we figure out what the frick happened up here." Suddenly, bright lights blind the police and the rest of the Kiteman gang see Eraser in the cockpit of the Joker copter. He looks at them, raising one of his hands that has a message written on it. "What are you waiting for? Come on!" The gang all immediately leap aboard the helicopter and they begin flying away. Bullock looks annoyed and says, "Ah, great. What am I going to tell the commish?" We cut back to the copter. The gang all look exhausted as they rest in there. We get a few long seconds of silence until Jaina asks, "What now?"
"I guess we go our separate ways."
Eraser snickers, and Magpie turns to him with raised eyebrows asking, "You think something's funny?" Eraser turns around, leaving the copter on autopilot. "Yes, actually. You want to put an end to this?" He gestures to all of them. "You all just proved you're a force to be reckoned with. You all single-handedly prevented one of the biggest breakouts in Gotham history and helped put Carmine Falcone behind bars." Mime signs, "When did we do that?" Eraser smirks. "When an anonymous source left a copy of evidence he previously hid right at the doorstep of the GCPD. Kiteman grins, saying in a sing-song voice, "I knew it." Eraser ignores him. "If all of you stay a team, you could take over the criminal underworld and make a real name for yourselves. Think of the power that'd bring you." Kiteman looks contemplative and says, "Well, I gotta be honest. Eraser has a point." Magpie looks at Kiteman like he's as insane as the inmates they just stopped. "You can't be serious." Charles chuckles. "We are a force to be reckoned with. So imagine what we can do if we actually use our combined abilities
to actually make a real change for others like us. The outcasts. The ones who need the right push towards a better life, away from the sickness and disparity of Gotham. Together, we can help the lost ones like us realize they have something they need to believe in again. A beating heart. He looks at each of them with hope and says, "Well, what do you say? Team?" Magpie gives a bright smile and raises her hand first. "If you believe in us, then how can I refuse?" Mime raises an eyebrow and looks to Spellbinder. He grins and raises his hand. "Count us in, or could you get used to this little association we got going here?" Jaina sees her reflection grinning eagerly in the helicopter window, with both thumbs up. Jaina sighs wearily, but she raises her hand. "I guess it would be nice to have friends who can help me keep Rabbit in check. I'm in." They all turn to Eraser. Kiteman asks, "So, you in, buddy?" Eraser turns his pilot chair around and nonchalantly says, "Hell yeah." And the copter flies off into the sunset, a new team formed and a family just beginning. Now for an end credits song, I picture Beauty and the Broken by Highland plays. After the first half of the credits finish, we see Harvey Bullock in our first post-credits scene, and his cops still patrolling the scene of Arkham. Commissioner Gordon approaches him, played by Tom Selleck. "Harvey, do we have everybody?" "Yep, all except the freaks who took the clown copter." Gordon nods, telling him good job, and then Gordon walks towards the shadows, and we see a shadowy figure with pointed bat ears standing waiting for him. "Where were you tonight? We could have really used the help out here today." Surprisingly, a feminine voice comes from the bat figure. "I'm afraid he couldn't help it, Commissioner." Gordon looks at the figure in confusion. "Batgirl?" Batgirl steps out of the shadows, played by Sophie Turner. Commissioner Gordon looks baffled as he says, "Not that we're not glad to see you, but where's Batman?" Batgirl looks hesitant but replies, "He's away on a mission. Far out of Gotham this time." Gordon nods and says, "Too bad. I think he'd be glad, or whatever it is close to him being happy, seeing Carmine finally behind bars." Batgirl nods smiling, but before they could continue, she gets a call from her communicator from Alfred. "Batgirl, we need you back at the cave. It's urgent." "On my way." Meanwhile, Carmine is in jail calling someone on the phone.
"Listen, Max, you better pull all your resources into this, or there will be blood on your hands. You hear me?"
Max over the phone.
"Listen, I would love to help, but I've got my own problems."
"Like what?"
We cut to Shrek's office. He looks at someone off camera nervously, but responds still on the phone. "I couldn't really say. Take care of yourself in the slammer, Carmine." The crime boss raises his voice, continuing to threaten him before Max slams the phone down. A harsh, scratchy voice of the figure off-screen says,
"Now, where were we?"
Max swallows nervously. "We were discussing why you are here, Mr.
I'm Red Hood, and I'm your new boss."
End post-credit scene. Second post-credit scene. We cut to a dark room. Only a desk lamp is lighting it up. At a desk sits a strange group of individuals. Strange even for Gotham. And they're all looking at a file folder and footage of this Arkham breakout. A woman wearing a smiling mask and a nurse's outfit delivers a report. "So it appears we have lost our darling Bootface. Oh, poor thing. He was such a beautiful specimen to our group." A bald man, covered in tattoos that keep changing different colors and different words, nods in response, and one of his tattoos spells out a message saying, "Yes. Once again, we've lost another member. But it seems we may have competition." The leader of these figures, sitting in a middle chair, simply puts his hand up to his throat and makes a gesture, making the sound himself through a weird helmet. He gestures to the bald man covered in tattoos, and a message forms on the bald man's other arm. It says, "We need to put an end to this." Cut to black. And there you have it. That is my pitch and beginning for a DC Cinematic Universe, starting with a Kiteman movie. I really hope you all enjoyed. And for all those of you who watched the whole thing through, thank you so much. This took so much time to prepare, and I had fun doing it. I hope that you'll tune in for the next one I do. I'm not sure how long or when it'll come out, but next time we're getting Red Hood. And hey, if you liked the video, please consider liking or subscribing, and leave a comment down below. And don't worry, I know that this story pitch has a lot of plot holes and maybe still needs a lot of work, but that's kind of the point. It's really only a concept, but I just really wanted to share my ideas with all of you. And I thank you for all of you who listened to it. And hey, if you have ideas on how you would do a Kiteman movie, please comment down below. I love seeing people's movie ideas. I'm Steven Swamp Dog, and this has been the first part of the KDU.